every time I had seen deer come through this area, it was like 9:30 in the morning. So I always take my time moving in. I don't want to bump deer that are already coming through the area.
Yep.
And it's a little bit of a challenge to get back in there. So I kind of just take my time and ease my way in. Those deer that I had seen the previous weekend came up the opposite side of the ridge. And in the video, you can see them kind of gather around a ladder tree stand. They're checking it out. I guess they're just like naturally curious. So I decided I'm just going to sit in the ladder stand. Why make it harder than it needs to be?
Yeah.
So I slept in a little bit later that morning. It's gray light, but I get set up, turn the camera on. I'm getting ready to shoot an opening interview, and I can hear something coming up the ridge below me. So it completely catches me off guard because I haven't seen a deer before 9:30 back here yet the entire season. And sure enough, there's a doe in the lead. There's a younger doe behind her, probably, I would have to guess it was last year's spawn.
Yeah.
And they're coming up. And below them, there's a young buck kind of pushing them up the ridge. And I'll bring it out in a second. I have the skull cap from that deer in the shop here with me, but he starts pushing them up. And I kind of learned a lesson from the previous weekend. Don't shoot the first deer in a string of deer.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of eyes behind her looking, and especially when you're uphill and they're coming uphill, they're already looking above them. So it's not too much of a difficulty, not too much of a challenge for them to just catch you in a tree stand.
Yep.
So I ranged the first one, and she's on the outer limits of my effective range. So I practice out to 30 with the longbow, but I wanted to keep all my shots inside of 20. Well, she comes by at about 24, 25 yards. And I'm ranging her, expecting all the other deer to take the exact path that she took.
Right.
Then the next deer comes up, and that's the kind of 1.5-year-old doe. And then behind her is the young buck. And I can tell, he's a young buck. He's looks to be, like a pretty big cow horn. He's a 1.5-year-old. This is probably his first set of antlers that he's sporting. I'm not making any kind of judgments based on hunting trophy deer at this point. I just want an opportunity at a deer with traditional gear for the end of the season. So I range him. He's 26 or 27 yards, but he's still kind of quartered to me. So I'm expecting him to make up some of that ground. He kind of stops for a minute, and I'm trying to fiddle with the camera, but I'm also trying not to lose sight of him. And I'm definitely trying not to blow it and spook him, because these deer are not but 10 or 15 yards in front of him. So there's a lot of eyes still active. He starts to quarter away a little bit, and I panicked in the moment. And the pressure of trying to get deer with traditional gear, trying to film the hunt, having this opportunity caught me off guard so early in the morning. I just made the decision to go ahead and draw and try to take a shot at him. So I hold the way I shoot is I gap shoot, and I index the top of the broadhead to be my point of aim reference. So I bring that broadhead up above the shoulders, about 6 inches, which is where I was shooting for 25, 30-yard shots.
Yep.
And he comes in to my sight picture. I stop him. He stops. He has no idea what's going on, doesn't know I'm in the world. And I let the arrow go. He turns and looks back at those does and starts to take another step forward. And I watch the arrow, it goes slow. And at 25 yards, you get to watch that arrow come up, rise, and fall into your target. And I watch that arrow rise up and fall as he starts to move forward, and it catches him behind the last rib.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a major disappointment. And for the camera, all I say is just, oh, no, I can't believe it. And I just turn everything off and try to gather myself. I did see as the deer ran away, he had half the arrow hanging out this side and half hanging out the other side. So I know I've got 2 holes in him. And I thought at first maybe I hit liver, something to that effect. And he runs about 30 yards ahead, stops in a big laurel patch, and I can hear him crash around for a second. So I thought maybe, just maybe, it was high enough that it caught that aorta running below the spine.
Yeah.
And maybe he's dying right there. I hear him crash around for a minute, and then I settle everything down, get packed out of the tree, and start going looking for blood. Well, Couldn't find anything. I found hair where I hit him. I couldn't find the arrow. I watched him run away with it. And the night before it had rained, so everything was covered in fresh rain. It was hanging on, pooling in leaves and all of that. And so I didn't have a lot of hope for finding a good blood trail. What I did have was soft enough ground to where once I got on his trail from the point I found hair to the general direction I saw him running, I started following deer tracks. And it was probably 40 or 50 yards before I found the first speck of blood kind of washed out from all the wetness on the surrounding foliage. And that first speck of blood was real watered down, but I knew I was on the right track. So
just catching it too is good fortune, right? I mean,
yeah. You know, I've tracked a lot of deer and helped buddies track deer. And I grew up tracking deer as a little kid because my dad's colorblind. So he wasn't a big hunter, but when he did hunt, he usually hunted with a shotgun, and I had to find his deer for him because he's red-green colorblind. So everything's kind of just a shade of brown. And so I kind of knew how to do that early on, and I got better and better at it. And so now I'm looking for just the footprints in the mud. I follow that for probably 100 yards. I gave him an hour or so before I started, but I wanted to try to catch up to this deer because I'm still thinking in my mind, maybe he went down, maybe I got that aorta.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I found him in his first bed, I jumped him from his first bed, that I realized he was 100% gut shot. I had a little bit of blood on the ground, but when I found him in his bed, there was like gut components, if you will.
Yeah.
Still haven't found the arrow. But as he ran away, I could see where the wound was. It was further back than I even thought. So now I've jumped a deer that should have sat, 12, 16 hours before I even picked up the track. And I had to kind of make a decision there. I don't know if it was exactly the right decision or not. Probably the right decision would have been from the point that I shot that deer, it was in doubt. I didn't watch the deer go down. So I didn't know exactly how good of a shot I had made or not made. And I should have just left that deer come back in the morning, try to find him. If I had done that, I could have found him in his first bed dead, the next day.
Right.
And it would have been a pretty cut and dry story. A bummer I had to wait so long to pick up the track, but a dead deer within 200 yards of his shot would have been good to go. Instead, what I did was once I jumped him that first time, I thought I either have to push this deer now to exhaustion, or I have to risk him being 500 or 600 yards away and I may never find him. So what I did was I pushed the deer. I kept following his tracks, following little specks of blood. And I did that for a little over half a mile. And I jumped him 2 more times. So I've almost followed that deer for 3/4 of a mile over the span of about 4 hours from the time that I picked up the track, and jumped him 2 more times and pushed him and pushed him and pushed him until finally I see him get up from a bed, run down into a creek bottom. I run down that creek bottom as fast as I could possibly go, trying to catch up to this deer. And I thought, he will for sure fall down in this creek somewhere. And so I'll be able to essentially overtake him in the creek. So I'm pulling an arrow out of the quiver, and I'm running with an arrow in one hand and my bow in the other. And I'm just, heels are kicking the back of my head as I'm piddling down this creek bottom. I crash down into the creek bottom, splashing everywhere. He's splashing everywhere. And he turns and starts kind of running down the creek bottom. And then he turns and starts trying to come up the other side of the bank. And it's steep, up above us. It's a real steep ridge. And I thought, there's just no way he's going to make it. So he turns, and he's probably 30 or 40 yards in front of me at this point. He starts to get some ground on this bank. And then, exhaustion, his wound, everything just overtook him. He couldn't take it anymore. He starts to collapse. His feet are kind of scraping dirt down. He's not able to make any ground. And I was about 15 or 20 yards behind him. And I start trying to talk kind of, I don't know what I was going through in my head. I start talking to the deer, you know, I'm like, just hold on, buddy. It's almost over. Just give me a second. As I'm coming up the hill towards this deer with the bow at like 3/4 draw in front of him. Finally, he gives me, instead of a straightaway shot, a 1/4-2 shot. And I snuck it in behind the last rib, and the arrow came out up above his shoulder through his neck. And he sprinted about 15, 20 yards, trying to make it up that hill again. And then he just piled over and rolled back down the hill. And that was the end of the hunt. About 4.5 hours from the point
that is crazy.
Shot that deer. Crazy is a good way to describe it.